You probably don't care who I am, me neither, so I'd like to get to know you a little better. Who of you is involved in game development, be it on the art side, tech, whatever? Okay, cool, totally unexpected. Who of you grew up in the 90s and had a machine with DOS? Hey. Who of you grew up in the 2000s and had their first gaming experiences then? Okay. And I guess there's nobody here who grew up in the 2010s? Hey, who knows? Could be a young audience. So what I'm going to talk about is essentially the Ausschmeißer. That means I'm going to be the person who throws you out of this event tonight. It's super cozy, it's not highly technical, even though I'm going to show you a bit of code and some games. My slides, this is pretty much the only text slide. Everything else just images, so you can sit back, relax, maybe sleep a little, get prepared for the drinking later on or the not drinking. I'm going to tell you about my history of game development. I started like 20 years ago in the year 1995, which is more than 20 years, but we don't really point it out, right? So in the beginning, this is my niece, Emily. She's being brought up with the technologies I was brought up because they gotta learn the low-level stuff first before they can go high-level. This is actually very recent. My mom tried to find this thing to give it to her because she remembers playing Tetris, the only game my mom ever played, and she gave her that, and now she's into gaming, which is great. She's 4. We just need to make sure she doesn't game too much, but bringing her up on this is great because this runs on batteries. The batteries are dead in 3 hours. And I started out like this as well. I always loved games. This was the only console I ever had in my entire life, up until my 30th birthday or so. And it was great. It was fantastic because it was social. Everybody else had one of these. There was this link cable. Anybody remember that? It's fantastic. Freaking fantastic. Obviously, if you went on vacation with your parents and had that while you were driving in the car, you could not play unless you turned on the light, which would tell your parents you're playing games, at which point they will yell at you and say, so you have to turn it off and wait until the street lights come. Yeah. So that was my initial experience. And that was also the factor that brought me to programming eventually, because I thought, how hard can it be to create things like this? I mean, there's a tiny screen, tiny pixel, it's only really green in different shades. Things aren't moving in complicated patterns, so let's see how that works. And I had an uncle who was deeply into games and deeply into pirating games. He was the first person to have a DVD burner and a CD-ROM burner and all the burners that are there. So I had a source of games for PC, which up until that point, until I got one, I was playing at his place, and eventually I convinced my parents to get me one. And so my adventure started. Hey, cool. There we go. HTML and CSS, everybody. Who remembers seeing something like that as the only kind of UI? Great. So this is what it looked like when you turned on a PC in the early 90s, mid 90s, before Windows 95 actually brought like proper UI, like graphical UI to everybody. And I was so happy when I first saw that. I had no idea what it meant. I got a couple of commands from my uncle who would tell me, just type this in and the game will start, and then put that floppy disk in and the game will probably not start because you have to configure all this shit, I guess. I was happy for a very long time, so I got to play games. A lot of games. Oh my god, games, oh, nostalgia. So LucasArts, big part of my childhood. Like this Monkey Island, I didn't like too much actually. Like my jam, that was my jam, because that was absurdist humor. And there was kind of a cousin, which was also very absurd at points. LucasArts in the 90s was like the shit. They not only did these point-and-click adventures, all running on a virtual machine called ScumVM, which is fucking amazing. They also did stuff like TIE Fighter, X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, and Dark Forces, and other games some of you may not know, but others will probably have dear to the heart. So this whole genre, all of this, kids, does not exist anymore. It is dead. There's some people who try to revive it. Coincidentally, one of the guys who worked on this brought out the game, I think 2 years or 3 years ago. Already forgot its name because nobody plays point and click adventures anymore. Anybody know what the? Yes, yes, yes. So I actually played that, but not for too long. So these were great times when you liked stories and humor and clicking on things that do or do not do something. Then there was this. And Mom didn't like it, but I liked it a lot. So I had to play this in private when Mom wasn't home, or when it was night and Mom was asleep, or when Mom was at work, or whenever I was alone. So I played this a lot because it was also very amazing. Obviously this is Doom by IDE software. There was other games similar to that. Like, what's the name of this game? Hey, you win nothing. This was like these two were the big twos. And from those two there was like a lineage of 3D first-person shooters based on these two engines. Like Hexen and Shadow Warrior, I think it was called. Stuff like that. It was fucking amazing. There were even RPGs, like I think one of the Ultimas kind of looked like that. Didn't use the engines of that, but also kind of looked like that. Couldn't find an image because I couldn't remember the name because I'm old. No, I think yeah, you could be right. Could be right that it was Underworld. Yeah. Yeah, probably. Actually, you're right. Yeah. But this was my jam, so I like 1995 was when I got into this kind of stuff. Everything that came before I have to ignore and can't talk about because I haven't experienced it, and that is the limitation of my talk. So excuse me, old man. This is also great. The Britney Spears memorial microphone lets you hear all my breathing, so if it gets too loud, just let me know and I try to take a break. There was also this. Anybody remember this? Few. Dark fucking Forces. Holy shit, this was better than the other two in my opinion, because it was in an already established kind of universe, and you had movies that go along with it, and you even had books, which I never read because fuck books. You have a PC now, you can play games. This was fantastic, and out of that came something called Jedi Knight, which was one of those quakey looking like things where you actually had a lightsaber. I think you didn't have it. Yeah, I think you had a lightsaber at some point, but it wasn't as good as in Jedi Knight. But that was another decade. So shooters in the 90s, fucking fantastic. We had all we needed. We could even network them via cables that weren't the cables we use today, sort of, kinda. And we could even play online if we had a modem and then internet connections, which nobody had. Another genre that is essentially dead. There's some derivatives of that genre called MOBAs, I guess, which I don't care for, but I guess some of the younger people like League of Legends and stuff like that. So this was the birthplace of that. Before Command & Conquer, there was actually another Westwood game called Dune 2. Who remembers that? Cool, you're also old. It's great. So I loved Command & Conquer. I didn't care for this. Fuck that, orcs. Don't care. This is the future. Also, it has super campy like cutscenes. That was also one of the things that they introduced back then when CD-ROMs came up. All of a sudden you could have a lot more space than on these shitty floppies, and you could put so much campy crap on 650 megabyte CD-ROM. That was fucking amazing. Like as a 12-year-old, this was your darkest dreams come true. Super campy shit. And Command & Conquer kind of was the master of that kind of art. Sadly, I didn't bring a video of that. I would have liked to see you enjoy it as much as I did. Warcraft, boring. Orcs, elves, who cares? XCOM, future, sci-fi. So this actually kind of got rebooted a couple of years ago. Haven't played it, but back then I played a shit ton of that. I had no idea how it works. Like still no idea. There was like a base you could build, and then you would fly around the globe and stuff. I don't know, but it was fun. And then there was this, and we will come back to this later. This is the game. Yes. And it's Brotheran. Oh my god. You make me so proud, kids. So as you can see, not really quite 3D, sorta kinda. It was like this bitmaps that scale and rotate, kind of pretend they're 3D. For me, that was perfect because my machine couldn't run anything more complex than that anyways. I love these games, and what came with those games was getting a joystick. Also something not a lot of people have anymore, because nobody plays Rocket League with a joystick. You could, once. Another game which kind of sort of is interesting is this. It's called Comanche, and it used a technology that never really got off the ground, called voxels. Anybody remember voxels? They came kind of sort of back with Minecraft, but those are not real voxels. That's just somebody who's lazy. Who can't 3D model, so it makes everything a 3D block. But these were voxels, and they were raycasted or ray traced in later games, sort of, kind of. And for the time, this was like the most realistic thing you could actually find in terms of graphics for a very long time. There was also some tank version of that, and then there was later on at the end of the 90s there was a game called Outcast. Anybody remember that? I think it featured Bruce Willis as the voice actor. Crazy times. Oops, nope, yet haven't seen anything. Who remembers this? So much nostalgia. Yes, stunts. Fucking amazing. This was like a stunt driving game where you could create your own tracks. Like I think what's the equivalent nowadays? Something Track Nation? Trackmania, yeah. So much cooler. Because it's old. Everything old is cool. Yeah, this was actually kind of sort of a revelation, because most games back then wouldn't let you build your own content, and this game sort of only became a good game if you build your own content and switch that or exchange that with your neighborhood kids, which were all sucked at building tracks because my tracks were the best tracks and your tracks suck. I played a lot of this game actually. I don't know why, it didn't look great. There was another one called Screamer in English. Here in Austria it was called Pleifuß. This kind of sort of imitated what would later become of the biggest console hits like Daytona and Ridge Racer on the PlayStation, but for PC, and it looked better because it had perspective correct texture mapping. So you wouldn't notice in this screenshot though, because for that you needed Clyde, which we'll talk about later. Yeah, so lots of different genres so far. Like we had adventures, FPS, strategy games, some weird shit like this. User created content, and then the CD-ROM came, and the CD-ROM brought us even more campiness in the form of something called Myst, which wasn't really campy, it was just a really fucking boring... It is, sorry, I mean, be honest. You only played this because the graphics were fantastic. I mean, it was essentially not real time, it was just videos being played back while you click on the new location on the fucking thing, and you wait, and you see the scenery, and it's like, wow. I've seen an hour of this, it's getting old real quick. Never got why people like this game so much, but it was kind of sort of paving the way for how should I put it, for less interactive storytelling things. Who knows what that is? Oh my god. Now we're getting into the depths of trivia. Yes, Rebel Assault, another Star Wars title, and this time it came on a CD-ROM, and it was essentially Dragon Slayer, just worse. That means a series of videos where you could sort of kind of interact, like this would play back flying through this canyon, and you were in control of this X-Wing. Not really though, because it was just stuff on top of a video, and that's it. But it was so fucking fantastic. Like, this is now on a PC, I can play like these amazing games, with these amazing, well, for the time, amazing graphics, all brought to you by double speed CD-ROM. And then there was this, and this actually brought me into horror. This was a game called, I know a guy who should know it, who's looking at his laptop and not listening to me. Hey guy, what's that game? Wow. Oh, okay. You're old school. This is Phantasmagoria. Oh yeah. Phantasmagoria. Oh yeah, I can agree with that. So Phantasmagoria was a revelation, not just because this was the first real gory thing, because before you had Doom, and you could sort of kind of imagine how people died, or zombies, or whatever you want to call them. Yeah, it's true. And in this game, you actually had real life people getting cut up and bleeding and gore and all of this. This is how should I put it? A very taken back scene. There was much more brutal stuff, and I liked it. And that also brought me into horror films, which to this day I like. Mostly the campy stuff, not the, I don't know, Blair Witch stuff. And then there was this. And then my life was not what it used to be because I spent so much freaking time on this game. Yeah, this is the butcher scene. The first time I hated a video game because I couldn't get past this motherfucker. Like hours and hours, and I didn't have an internet connection to look up to how to get past that. Only at school, and at school they would limit my time and would only have Alta Vista. What the fuck? You can. It's like a directory of websites you can't even properly search. Oh god. So you try this game and play it. Well, yeah, time sink. Who knows this?
Crusader.
Yes. So this was kind of sort of like this, just a little more linearized and less random. Holy shit, so cool. So essentially a dungeon crawler, a really linear one. Also one of the first games that had a higher resolution than 220 by 200 or 320 by 240 pixels. This was one of the first VESA games. You could do so much with that red little dude. Like you could have spider mines that you could remotely control. So many concepts, play game concepts that are now being sold to you as entirely new and blah blah blah. All of the shit happened in the 90s, and probably some of it already happened in the 80s. I just wouldn't know because I wasn't born yet. At least not until 83. Now you know my age, god damn it. This one, Fallout, yay, looks like the recent ones, right? Like you have this little you have this little dude here that you have on all the boxes for Fallout 3 and 4 and whatever. Only it was isometric, sort of semi-isometric, but it was essentially the same freaking game. I never played it, it was boring, sorry. I played this a lot though. SimCity. These had a lot of incarnations. Like this is a more advanced version. Was there a SimCity for C64, C128? I think there was. There was definitely one for Amiga, and this was a DOS version, which was kind of sort of fancy. Yeah, so now you have 4X games or management games. Here you have like dungeon crawlers and open world kind of games. And then you have this, which some guy over there might know. It's called Settlers, and I hated building all those pathways, but it was beautiful bastard. And then there was this, which is, right, you learned your trivia well. This was interesting because it was 3D, kind of sorted, and had an interesting lighting model. This was around the time when I started kind of getting more into the programming bits, so I could dissect these games on this kind of machine. And I would like to call out these buttons. Like this is obviously the big button, right? Big button probably means turn on, turn off. But why the fuck are there two more buttons? Yes, you have a turbo button and a reset button that's as big as your mom. Today you don't see the reset button being that big anymore because computers don't like to crash that much anymore. The reason why they crashed back then is when you made an error, your whole thing just fucking exploded because there was no real protection from the whole machine getting taken down or the little of what there was of an operating system being taken down. It was all single-threaded, cooperatively multi-threaded in the best case with TSRs and all this kind of stuff. But if you did the boo-boo, the PC told you and it was like, okay, reset button. So it was one of your bestest friends. Also, if you fucked up the configuration, oh, you're not there yet, man. Well, anyways, so these were super low spec. Like your phone is like probably 100 times faster than this thing. The turbo button didn't really help. There was graphics cards in them, dedicated ones, but they couldn't do shit other than draw lines real fast. They were even mostly shit at splitting 2D stuff. I had a Cyrus Logic. I think one of them is a Cyrus Logic. This kind of looks like one, I don't know. They were huge, but you didn't know what you were needing them for. They didn't accelerate anything for you. They did offer you this, like different graphics modes from CGA, EGA, VGA, VESA, SVGA, which was mostly about color, bit depth, and resolution. Like the first two you can basically ignore. VGA was all the earlier DOS games until up to 1996 were using 320 by 200 pixels with 256 colors, color palette indexed into a palette of, I think it was kind of sort of 16-bit colors. So what you would do is essentially before your scene starts, you figure out how many colors your scene needs. You write the palette, and then your bitmaps are indexing into that palette, like actually, not just like in Photoshop where you have kind of sort of like a virtual palette. Which was great because 320 by 200 pixels fit exactly into 64 kilobytes of RAM. And in DOS, you had that limitation, at least unless you use something called protected mode, that your data must fit inside that amount. Like this was the biggest continuous amount of memory you could have in DOS without having to switch segments, which I won't explain, which made things quite cozy. Resolution-wise, 320 by 200 was like the standard. Eventually somebody, I think it was Airbrush, figured out something called Mode X, which would give you all of this, plus double buffering. It just made you a little crazy because you had 4-bit planes now, I think, where you had to write parts of your blah. And the VESA standard came out, and all these fancy graphics cards from before would kind of sort of understand that and allow you to go higher. But 320 by 200 was pretty much the standard. Development, sound cards, that was awesome. You had no idea what all this meant because nobody ever told you and you have no internet, so you just play around until nothing works. There was a metric ton of different audio devices back then, but the probably most known one was the Sound Blaster 16 thing. If you have an emulator like DOSBox, this is essentially what it emulates. And you would fuck around with this and eventually you would have sound. If you ever tried to program your own game with sound, you would never get to a stage where you can play back anything that sounds like sound. Like you get a bloop, but that's pretty much what you got. And that wasn't through the sound card, that was through the internal speaker that would be used when you reset. And then it makes bloop. That was your game sound. Fantastic. Networking, we had IPX cables and corresponding networking cards, and it was a bitch because those motherfuckers were super stiff, and if you had like two rooms really far apart, like laying that out on the floor was terrible. But he did it anyways, because then you could play, wait for it, 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 wait for it. You could play this. Like together, in harmony, eternal harmony. My brain. So this was networking, was terrible. And we had all of this, so many joysticks, none of them really working after a couple of months because they were all clunky and falling apart. Not all of them, Sidewinders were great. But yeah, we had a lot of peripherals and not just gamepaddy things. Gamepads came later, like way later when the console started taking off around 96 with the classic PlayStation layout and all of that. But this was everybody's jam, like joysticks. Has anybody never seen a joystick in real life here? That would be interesting to know. Could be, honestly.
People are already buying them again for Elite Dangerous.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't think about that. You're right. Good. Come back off the joystick. Development environments, or not. In this case, first you start with config sys and auto-exec-bud. And you do a bunch of shit and you don't know what it is. It's magic incantation, but it might or might not make your game work. I spend a lot of time on this. I could explain it now to you, but I won't because it will also rot your brain like it did to mine. When you were a developer, you would then try to figure out how can I paint stuff. Like I want to make fancy pictures that I can display. There was deluxe paint, but nobody could afford it, much less know about it. I didn't. So what we did, we built our own with QBasic. Fast Track, that was sort of like a copy of an Amiga tool for mod tracking. I knew one guy who used something like this. I never tried it myself, so this is just really, I'm telling you stuff I don't know about really. And then programming languages and IDEs, you would not really believe how powerful they were even back then. Like Xcode today, shit against this thing, or this thing. And if you wanted to go fast, you went with Whatcom C, because that actually had an optimizer that would spit out assembly code, machine code that was actually good. The Doom guys used this instead of this. because it was fast. He likes fast, Cormac. And sometimes you needed to go down there into the cellar called assembly, x86 assembly. You had different flavors depending on what kind of CPU you were targeting, so everybody starts out with 8086, which we were going to see later, and then you go to something with more than 16 bits per register, because it sucks. Yeah, this was good times. I was brought up on this, so self-starter, because there was nobody who could teach me this. So you go to the library, get books. Later on you could kind of sort of surf the internet, get a couple of illegal books, and you would just go through that stuff. What was also there was this, which is currently not available anymore, and for which there is no replacement. This is an English version, it's called Micro Adventure. What he had was stories with programs, listings. If Nate is watching, hi Nate, I know this is from you. You would read through that story and then type in that program into your basic interpreter, and it would kind of sort of draw something or solve a puzzle related to the story. Fucking fantastic way to learn programming. There was a German equivalent that I had, which was in the back of one of these magazines. I don't know what it was, ASM, something like that, which did something similar, but it built a full raycasting engine. I also stole a lot of books from my school because nobody ever rented them or lent them out, so I didn't feel too bad about it. I still have them at home. And hey, I'm the only one who's in there with this little stand thing. Like, I'm the only one who ever actually read that book. It is actually being cared for better at my place than that shitty school library. And then there was this book, which was like, oh, it told you about stuff like Pentium pipelining and how to properly implement Fresnel, line drawing, and so on and so forth. So these were the kind of resources I had back then to learn programming, because I had no friends who could program or know how to program. And eventually, the school internet got better, and some people decided to create websites. And as I started out with something called QBasic, which we're going to see in a bit, I frequented this kind of site, qbasic405.com. How much more obvious can it be? And I have to point out that number 2 in this top 10 downloads list is my 3D library for QBasic, which is pretty fantastic. Yeah, so there were a lot of people on there from which I could learn every time I went to school and had access to the internet computer thing. There was also this, which was complete garbage. I didn't find anything, which was later replaced, thankfully, by Google. Who remembers this? This is so much better than SVN, Git, or the cloud. You just put it on a bulky little thing that rots away in some cupboard, and you never get to read it again. It's also very slow because this cable says slow. Huh? Yeah, slow. Serial. So what did I do? I have to check that I'm not going over time. Is there any of the ordinances here? Do you know what the last minute is I have? Like what time? 15.
But since we started later.
Okay, give me until 20. I can do it. And you know when you can prepare for going out for a drink or a smoke. So what I did was this. Hello. The first thing I did was this, because that's the only programming environment I had in MS-DOS. And the fun part about this is that, I hope I have the keyboard shortcuts. Yeah, so it had a help system, and it was like the most fantastic fucking help system ever. Not only did it show you all the keywords and stuff, it also had little tutorials for each of these. So if I'm going to search for, oh, I can't scroll on this because, oh, there we go. So let's go and see line, the graphic statement. So it would tell you all the things about the line statement. And when you scroll down, yeah, I lied. If you go to the circle thing and you scroll down, no, come on, don't do this to me. I lied again. If you go to the screen thing, well, some of these actually had small little examples that you could just copy and paste. I didn't really prepare that, I think. So this was one way of doing it. You could just call line and draw from x1, y1 to x2, y2, or you could be super metal and you say, define the segment to be this address. Oops. Who knows this address? Who remembers? Nobody? Okay. And then you say, hey, poke the bitch in the middle of the screen, like this. And then 320 times 100. So this is how you calculate the memory offset of a pixel in a 320 by 200 grid in linear memory. And I'm probably gonna fuck it up. And then you say the color, which is 4, which doesn't mean anything, but if you've been developing it during that time, it means red. And then you have an overflow. Let's make it smaller. Let's just put it at the top line of the screen. No, come on, not what I want. There we go. I forgot one thing. We also need to enable graphics mode, because otherwise you would be stuck in text mode. And it's not screen, it's screen. There we go. And you cannot see it, I think, but there's a light red dot at the middle of the first line of the thing. So this is a lot. Thank you. This is how I make my money in real life. No, but I did other stuff as well. Let me see how I can get out of this abomination. Edit. And start. This I did together with a friend of mine, Mike, who was an excellent artist. He would draw all of this on paper. I would scan it in and then export it to a PCX file, which was the file format for images he would use back then. And then convert it to a QBasic BM, now what was it called? I can't load BSafe thing. So it had a super good backstory with a lot of stuff and important things. And this was the end boss. And then it loads level and then it's super fucking slow. Yeah. And you see how many triangles are being rendered up there? 145 for the floor and 186 for the walls. And eventually you can go out of there. Oh, wait. It's so good. Wait for it. Wait for it. Wait for it. Wait for it. Pain. Pain. It didn't have audio because, as I said earlier, I didn't know how to program a sound card. So. Yeah, anyways, so this was actually not a raycasting engine, for those in the know. This was actually a 3D polygonal rendering engine with a fine texture mapping. All written in trusty old QBasic. And it looks something like this. It's great. It has something we call, what the hell? ZUBs, so functions and procedures, things that return stuff, things that don't return stuff. And it's actually not that bad. Like, I was expecting it to be really bad, but it's like, I can work with this. So to make it faster, I actually built, I ported the rendering code to assembly, and I could show you that now if I can find the thing. And this is going to be my last demo for the day. So where are we? Side projects. I should have prepared this. Look at this hand. Look closer. I don't know where it went. Can you hold it up for the screen? There's the hand. Yes. So there we go. So I have a bunch of stuff in here, like one routine copy memory, and you would have to use segments and offsets into segments instead of just a single pointer. Then you have a bunch of stuff that nobody understands anymore because it's archaic. And then you have like a translate polygons thing. All it does is you have a polygon structure with X, Y, Z, 4 points, because I'm cool, I render quads, not triangles. And you have an offset and you want to translate a bunch of these things, and it looks like this. Ta-da! This was super cool for me. Today nobody gives a shit, because this is okay. But it actually improved the performance by 40% and made it so that I could actually run it in DOSBox. So it was worth it. So this was my life back then. QBasic and assembler, because QBasic sucks and is slow. So yeah, eventually have to branch out into C or assembler. And I think this is probably the most valuable thing I could take away, that I started from the low end. It forced me to understand some concepts that made it easier to transition into higher level things. Nope, we're not done yet. So where were all the engines? Obviously there was the IDE software engines that you could mod to some degree. The same for Duke Nukem, but there was nothing like a Unity or something like that. Yeah. And then something happened. Those fuckers came on stage and said, we're gonna make it Doom and Quake pretty. They never made Doom pretty, but they made Quake pretty and they made Tomb Raider pretty. So what you had was apparently was something called 3D hardware accelerated rendering, and that was the birth of a new era. And that era was continued on Windows. I'm just gonna take you through that quickly because you're probably more familiar with this. So Windows 98 was kind of the thing I then used because 95 I passed on, and there were games like this. Quake 3, and I finally had internet access and I would just spend all my life at night doing this and shooting people in the face. It was brilliant. There was also Unreal Tournament 2004, which I played at work then, where I also got to shoot people in the face, but people I knew in real life, which was much more satisfying. Then there was this, super story-based fucking first-person shooter. Who the fuck comes up with that kind of stuff? It worked. It was one of the best games back then, and I still like it. Then there was this a little later, and away goes my life again. Then came this. It's all in the same period, actually. This is all from 2000 to 2009, and it's all Valve property. It's crazy how much impact that had, because this was like competitive gaming. Quake 3 was also competitive. But this was like story-driven, first-person shooters, all stuff you didn't quite have like that before. This made everything different for a lot of people, and we're still waiting on part 3, motherfuckers. Portal, the mechanics. I mean, I know this is kind of sort of stolen from a guy who then worked on this at Valve, but this is fucking brilliant. All Valve. Crisis still can run on my latest PC because fuck that. This was my jam as well because trebuchets. You had this. Who knows this? Black and white. Great. Game was shit, but cute. Like you could smack your animal. Oops. This I never played because I don't know. I'm weird. But I played a lot of this, which goes against my DOS days where I said fuck the orcs and elves. And from that was born all the MOBAs, all the League of Legends, because there was a mod for this, which essentially kind of sort of worked like League of Legends. Dota? MOBA? What's the difference again? I'm old. Yeah, you know what I mean. This I never played, but it was Sims, and it brought a lot of people into gaming, additional people. Like my mom would probably play this, which is great. It simulates your life, so you put the life in the life to have more life in the life. And then the online stuff happened, like RuneScape or Leroy. Never got infected by that stuff, which is great because my sister got infected and that wasn't nice. Like she spent so many years on this stupid fucking game, which was just collect these 10 red tails. But yeah, this was a revolution. I mean, you had it with Ultima Online a little bit earlier, which was also kind of a thriving community, but nothing as big as these two games. And then this happened, EVE Online, which is also very old actually, if you think about it. Still alive. And we had this, which was an expansion on the open world concept from earlier. There was actually a DOS version of this with a top-down view, which I think was more fun. And this, do you remember Member Berries? Yeah, Oblivion, I think. No, wait, Elder Scrolls Morrowind. That's it. Yeah, I think so. I'm the speaker, you should trust me. It's totally Morrowind. And then this happened, which was also in 2009. This fucking game is 10 years old. Yeah. Yeah, first alpha 2009. Fun anecdote, I was into Java programming because of my job. I actually got to know that guy on the Java gaming forum. He was an asshole then, he is an asshole now. This also 2000, I think 9, I can't remember, but in that period, like I looked it up really. Weird. So this started the indie kind of thing. Before that, you had that in the 80s with all these garage games from Britain for the Spectrum and Sinclair stuff. That died down in the 90s, kind of sort of, with a small revival with shareware, where IDE got their coins. And then at the end of the 2000s, this happened, which was very interesting. That's how the PCs evolved. The reset button got considerably smaller, but you put a lot of light in that thing. Mine never looked like that. I hate that. Like, I have a screen that's illuminating me. I don't need this. But it got faster considerably because we had better graphics card, and NVIDIA bought 3DFX and then just expanded on the offering, and you had this was the GeForce 8 series that was like somewhere 2003 or 4 and would make your Quakes and your Unreals faster and your Crysis not really playable. So we had a switch to 16-bit colors, which was really bad. It was so bad to work with this, and 32-bit colors, which was nice and cozy. Initially, you had fixed hardware transform and lighting. That was like DirectX 7. So you got some acceleration for the rasterization stage and for the transformation stage, but you couldn't really program it. Later on, we got programmable shaders, though the first versions of that was really nasty. In a sense, more pixels, wow, such refresh rate. The sound card died. Like, everything moved into the motherboard or CPU if you want. Does anybody still have a sound card, a dedicated one? Hardcore. This happened, modems, bleep, 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 bleep. Still the same. This happened. All the joysticks got killed by this one thing. And this happened. HAL. So me, in the DOS era, I couldn't program the sound card. In the Windows era, I could, because there was HAL, the hardware abstraction layer. That would shield you from the nasties of interrupts and DMA and all that stupid shit you had to deal with in DOS. So you had an API like direct sound or direct input, and just call into that, hope it works. And you didn't have to care for your hardware so much anymore. There were obviously differences in performance for graphics, but concerning sound or audio in general, and input and other peripherals that got abstracted through the HAL, things got a lot better. You people don't know how good you have it back then. So much harder. This happened. Up until DirectX 7 it was pretty much useless, but from DirectX 7 onwards it was pretty fucking cool. OpenGL also got a bit of fame, though it's a bit older. Development environments. Visual Studio, Visual C++ 6.0. So good. Never attained that greatness again, sadly. Code Warrior. Anybody remember that? Anybody from old Bonefish, like Michael Putz? So, fun story, I worked for Bonefish once as an intern. I don't remember if I was paid. There were two guys back then, Michael and the other guy, I forgot his name. They were working in Infeldgasse 16, I think it's called, at Science Park. And they were searching for somebody who could write the networking module for their game Stoked, based on some master thesis by one of the guys for animation and terrain erosion. And I was like, cool, Visual Studio or Visual C++ 6.0, right? No, Code Warrior, Metroworks stuff. I had no fucking clue what this was, and I couldn't get a hold of it. But eventually I got into the code, and I figured out I'm not good enough for this, and quit after like 2 months or so. I never saw a dime, they never saw any code. Fair trade, I think. Also this, Harvey probably remembers this one. You introduced me to that, Wings 3D. It's a box modeler, a really cool one in my opinion because I could use it, but artists might not think it is. Lots of books all of a sudden, like in the DOS area, no books. Suddenly, lots of books. Terrain, programming, this was a shitty book. This was great, this was more 3D, more like Abrish. This was great for collisions, came out 2004, I looked at it, I have it at home, I thought this is like 2010, 11. Nope, 2004. Flipcode, so many articles by so many people, shut down, but the articles are still available. GameDevNet, same thing with forums and all of that, and that's where you would hang around. Lots of engines and libraries, Allegro, which was already available during DOS days, but kind of became famous in the early 2000s. SDL, we still use that. GLFW is actually also very old, 2003. Ogre, rendering engine, great stuff. Irrlicht, from an Austrian developer actually. GameMaker, super old, got bought multiple times, became worse. What I did, I'm not going to show you too much about that. I built a library called Yaggle, yet another game library, in C, C++. It was terrible, but I was proud of it and it was mine. And then I built a bunch of shitty demos, I had a bunch of people use it. And then the Javas happened, and yeah, we're gonna get into that in a second. And then at the end of that circle, 2009, this blog post was posted. Unity used to work only on macOS. In 2009, they expanded to Windows, and that is the end of the story, sort of. They expanded to mobile real quick. No, don't show the need. Mobile, fun. This is where I spent most of my days in that period, 2009, 2016. So what did you have on mobile? You started with this. Then you had this. Then you got this shit. And it didn't get better. This was kind of fun, cute, but stolen from a Flash game. Same here. Same here. This was original. So if you build a mobile game today, make sure you have a really angry dude in the icon. It's like, ugh. Then a lot of people will give you monies to fill their Skinner boxes, and yeah, so much for responsible gaming and stuff. We are not gambling, no. We build mobile Skinner boxes, much better. Loot boxes are great if you get money out of them. And I started working on these motherfuckers because they were cheap and affordable, and I liked doing Java because that was my day job at a research company. So I built another library called libgdx, which was supposed to make it easier for me to target all of these devices. Quick trivia, this was actually a ND8 NVIDIA Tegra tablet that I got before any of these devices got published to the market, which was great. I got it because some Intel guy saw the libgdx library and said, "You're doing cool stuff, I send you shitty hardware." It was really bad. It had like this big of an antenna. I should have brought it. This big of an antenna. It was transparent in the background. It would like roast your face if you put it that way. So many lights, so many control things. It was really fucking slow. It couldn't like plit two transparent images, full screen images on top of each other while staying at 60 frames. It went directly down to 20 frames, and there you go. Nothing works. Another thing that happened is we got this. Who remembers Ouya? Who liked Ouya? Touchscreens, those are fun, hooray! Because they allow you for more intuitive input, I guess, that was the reason. But for games it was really bad because all of these concepts like 3D shooter and finicky management stuff and all of that crap where you need like precise input, that just went away. So all we did was put the thing in there, drag it up here, that's it. So that made for a little less variety in the initial games. We also had APIs like OpenGL, which was later replaced by Apple on iOS, at least with Metal. It was good or bad. We had Android Studio, well we didn't. We had Eclipse and a really shitty SDK. And up until 1.5 we didn't even have access to C, C++ via the NDK. It was all terrible and all bad. The iOS guys got tortured by Xcode, which I believe is the worst fucking IDE you can put on a person. QBasic is better than this, and I stand by this statement. I wrote a book. So I read a lot of books before, and then in the third decade I decided I read a book, and it was actually quite successful. And I'm happy I did. It's a learning experience. You shouldn't do it because your publisher is going to rip you off and sell your book for this price, and you get this. But at that point you're young and naive and don't know how money works. They exploit you. Tick. Indie gaming, yay, tick, way, let's all post our dev blogs. Reddit, pro, game dev, blah. Let's all post our shit and nobody reads it. Lots of engines, Unity, Cocos, Monogame, I don't even know what that icon is. Stuff, let's all do games, democratization of games. What did I do? Yeah, I told you. I fucked around with Android. This is touch screens 101. If you think you can do 2 touches, think again. This was early Android, it was fantastic. I actually got involved with the Android people because I reported some of these things. This was known, but I reported a bunch of OpenGL things that they fucked up, and that was cool. It was really nice to know that there's people. This is my only self-published game. It has awesome audio. I remember it being less long. So, my lovely wife has chosen to appear today. She was the one who created this particular torture chamber. Please give it up for my wife. I did a bunch of other prototypes like this thing that never went anywhere. Eventually something like this was published, and obviously it went super fucking viral and successful, so fuck. I also did a Lemmings kind of thing, but with bunnies. I did this thing, I just leave this running in the background while I keep babbling on. So yeah, let's fucking get rid of this. Come on! Yeah. God damn it! Okay. So you can build stuff with GX from this fancy pants 2003 kind of technology in the year 2018 to more pixely dungeon crawlers called Delver to, I don't know, let's scroll forward here, it's getting a little boring. Puzzle games on mobile. Weirdly enough, all of these are 3D. Most games are not 3D made with WebGX. I cannot scroll because HTML5 is retarded. Yeah, so lots of indies and bigger companies like Google used it for Ingress, the precursor to Pokemon and so on and so forth. Lots of cool stuff happened. It opened a lot of doors in my life. I eventually gave up on it pretty much around that time because I was involved in a company that was working on mobile development tools, which were bought by Xamarin and then Microsoft, which was fun. And yeah, that was that story. I learned a lot. I mostly learned that new platforms are not really better than old platforms. We got a bunch of awards and we are still #1 on GitHub if you count the stars, which are really important. Like stars, super important. Just look at the stars, don't look at anything else. The stars are really important. And I also got to work in San Francisco for a year at the mobile gaming startup. It was the worst fucking experience in my life and I will never want to do it again. This is why I do not work in games. This was a company funded by 3 guys coming from finance. They had a bunch of money. They thought they'd throw it at a wall and hope something comes back. So they saw me, saw my books, saw my blog, saw blah, and said, we want to hire you as the tech lead at this company. I said, cool, awesome, do I have to go there? Yes, you have to. I'm not going to see my mom for a while. Okay, I'm going to do that. So I went over there. I was pampered. I got a salary which was amazing. And I got 40 artists and 10 developers. And had to organize things. And it turns out the founders were complete retards. They exploited the artists, like really fucking exploited them. Not paying them on time, not paying them at all. They went to court with them. Then eventually they fired all the artists. Now we only had like 10 developers. What are you gonna do? Programmer art, then they got back some artists. It was a fucking mess. The hours were crazy, especially for the artists. Like I was pampered. I could work like whatever. But the artists had to be in there like in a Chinese sweatshop and just fucking do the thing. Eventually I left because this was toxic. And then I wanted to work in games again. So I built this library for games because... eventually they also published a game called Battle Camp. It's quite successful. The company shrunk down considerably. It's quite healthy. I keep in touch with the guys, and every now and then when I went to San Francisco, I meet up with them. They're happy now. So cool story, bro. And then I also got to Nate this motherfucker. This motherfucker is called Nate. He's my best friend, as you can see. Yeah, and after all my adventures up until 2016, I decided to kind of fucking join him. I've been working on this thing. It's called Spine. It's for 2D skeletal animation. It's the industry standard. Everybody uses it. It's great. You should too if you have a 2D game where you need to pull. And I also do other stuff, like I'm working in an office with architects and they asked me to do some VR stuff for them and their clients. It's fun. And I do some teaching and all kinds of fun bits. I try to avoid the toxicness of it all, so this is pretty healthy. And this is my talk. Thanks. If you have questions, I'll be happy.
So much. I don't know if anyone noticed, but for this slide,
What?
there were no text things. It was only pictures.
Yes,
Yes, but you failed at this slide.
I did?
But he had his own challenge, there was no text in it. So congrats to that for making still such a fantastic and vivid presentation.
And if you want to reminisce, I'll be at the fridge outside and we can talk about DOS games.
Maybe we can have one or two questions.
Oh, sure,
now.
sure.
Still, any questions still? Or ready for the fridge? Okay, one question here from Dietmar.
Oh, I'm not prepared. I didn't prepare for this test.
Why bad logic?
Because I suck at names. I mean, bad logic, libgdx, don't fucking know. Actually, there's a backstory, quick one. IRC was a real big part of my life for some years, because that's where all the cool kids were, and one of the FreeBasic posse, which is a QBasic kind of dialect for Windows and Linux and blah blah. There were two guys which I really adored and looked up to, called Blitz and Victor, and I learned a lot from them, and they called themselves Bad Logic, and then eventually I was taken into that kind of thing. Sort of like a underling, a servant, and I got to use that name after they quit all these things. So that's why Bad Logic. Also, I'm shit with names, so that's it.
You keep them together.
Yes. But we don't talk about that publicly, so.
I couldn't tell it.
Okay, thank you so much again.
Thanks, guys.
Fantastic.
Thanks for staying.